I want to start with a simple story today. There was a young man who approached a wise man who used to live at the edge of the forest, right? And then the young man approached him and he told this wise man, he says, I have this terrible battle going inside of me. On one hand, I want to do good and do the right things. But on the other hand, there is something that is pulling me back towards jealousy, envy, greed, selfishness. He said, what is going on? I'm really confused. There's this dichotomy going on inside of me. So the wise man smiled at him and he says, you are experiencing what is called as the greatest battle of all time. And not only that, it is a battle of the two wolves. So he goes, tell me more, right? What do you mean by the battle of the two wolves? So he says the first wolf is actually evil. And what it represents is your desires, your ego, your anger, your doubt, all about selfishness, basically all about you. And what it does is it tempts you to do things which make you feel good in the moment. It satisfies your soul to do what you feel good in the moment, but what it does, it causes you harm in the long term. He says the second wolf is actually good. The good wolf wants to go towards love, kindness, patience, compassion, self-discipline, sincerity. And it helps you overcome the selfish desires that you have inside of you. And what it does is you may have to do things which may look or feel really painful in the current moment, but it does have good benefits in the long term. And then so the young man or the youth asked him, which wolf will win? Because there's battle going on. So the wise man goes that the wolf that will win is the one you feed the most. So the youth thought about it for a little while and he went back and he says, how do I make this good wolf, how do I feed him, right? So I want to make sure that the good wolf is fed. So he says, what you do is you do acts of sincerity. And whatever you do in your actions, you have to make sure you have sincerity and khulus into your actions, right? And it is a way where you actually put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as front and center when you are doing your actions. If you can do all your actions while you put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as front and center, it will guide you to be patient, it will guide you to be humble, it will make you overcome your ego. And what will happen is, but he says, beware. He says that the evil wolf is always lurking behind you. And not only that, if you give into pride or show off your deeds or want to, let go of your anger, you're feeding the wrong wolf at that time. And what happens is that if you continue feeding whichever wolf you continue feeding, it will become stronger over a period of time and eventually will overcome you. So the youth went home one day, and what happened is one fine day, one of his neighbors, insulted him and said something to him really bad. Now, the young man, he had been practicing how to feed the good wolf. He felt anger in the moment at that time, but what he noticed was that he was able to control his emotions at that time. And the voice of the bad wolf became, continued to become weaker and weaker and faint, even though he could hear him, but he was able to always control the bad wolf or the evil wolf inside of him. Now, what I'm trying to tell you, the moral of the story is actually one of the hadiths of our Prophet, right? Salawat wal Muhammad. The hadith is that when they came back from the battle, right? So our Holy Prophet said that you have come from the lower jihad to now you are into the bigger jihad. Now, a lot of times jihad is actually, misconstrued as the word that's used for battle, but it's really struggle at the end of the day. And the external struggle or the lower jihad is what you would call battle, where you struggle against your foes or your enemies. But then the bigger jihad is actually the jihad that is going on inside of yourself, that is inside yourself with your own nafs, with your own soul. And that is called, and why is that called the bigger jihad, right? That's an interesting question to ask for yourself, right? It is called the bigger jihad because you are actually going through this struggle lifelong. When you go to battle, right, you struggle against somebody, it's temporary, you're done, you come back, it's done. But the internal struggle is always continuing to go on and on and on and goes on for a lifetime. Now, what I'm telling you is actually one of the traditions from the Chehel Hadith, the 40 Hadith that was written by Imam Khomeini in 1939. Now, the actual hadith about 40 hadith is this, right? This is the hadith from, as reported from Imam Kazim alayhi salam, salawat. He says, whoever from my nation preserves 40 traditions, right, about things that people need to know about religion. So he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise him on the day of resurrection as one who is a deeply learned scholar in Islam. If you memorize, or hifz, the word was used was hifz, 40 hadith, he will wake you up on the day of judgment as an alim, as a scholar. And then Rasulullah continues in another hadith, right? Because there's different versions of this hadith. In one of the other hadiths, Rasulullah says that, on that day, after he's raised up as a scholar, right, in Islam, not only that, Rasulullah says, I will be his personal intercessor. And not only that, I will be witness for him on the day of resurrection. That's just to remember 40 hadiths. Now, I'll give you a simple example. How many of you know one simple hadith we know all the time? Man kunta mawla fahaza aliyun mawla. Salawat wa Muhammad. Now, hifz means not only, memorizing it, right? Sometimes just simple, just memorize it. Writing it down, preserving it, right? Making sure it doesn't get distorted, for example, right? But also you teach people the hadith. Now that's on the visual surface of the hadith. When you read the hadith, that was it means. But there is a deeper meaning that was given by Allama Majlisi. He says, number one is preservation. You of course have to preserve the hadith. That was what I talked about it. But the deeper meaning is that you actually have to start cultivating an understanding of the hadith. You have to understand what the hadith, not memorize, but understand the hadith. And then the third step is actually, the third level, we actually raise your awareness so much where you start applying those hadiths in your life. Now, there are, two famous, there's a lot of actually works on 40 hadiths. There's 40 hadiths on the Quran. There's 40 hadiths on Imam Mahdi. There's 40 hadiths on this. There's actually more than 300 Shia and Sunni works that are done on 40 hadiths. Different hadith collections on particular topic, theme, 40 sheikhs, 40 cities, 40 sheikhs of 40 cities. So there's so many hadith collection out there. But the most famous one is the one that was written by a Sunni scholar. His name is Nawawi. And his book is called Al-Nawawi, Al-Arba Al-Nawawiya, which is like the 40 hadiths, actually 42 hadiths in there, but it's one of the most famous one. And it talks about practical applications in Islam. So that's one. The other one is the one I mentioned about Imam Khomeini, right, that he wrote. He had 40 hadiths also written, right, Chehel Hadith. It's actually available on alislam.org. Anybody wants to go download it. And there he talks about 33 hadiths are on ethics. So it's more about spirituality and how do you increase the level of your spirit. And then there is about 7 hadiths that are based on theological concepts. And what I was talking to you about was the very first hadith, which talks about, we have returned from the lesser jihad and we are going to now do the greater jihad. Salawat bal Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, it's interesting that greater jihad means it's personal inner struggle that everyone has to go through, and it's a lifelong process, right, at the end of the day. But what are the obstacles in this jihad of nafs, right? What are the obstacles we need to be aware of? Number one is that shaitan always does waswasa to you constantly. Qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas, malikin nas, ilahin nas, min sharril waswasil khannas, allazi yuwaswisu fi sudur. So shaitan's always whispering to you. The other one is where ego affects your nerves. There is a beautiful, ayah in the Quran. Allah says, "Indeed, the soul is ever inclined to evil." So it's not only shaitan, but our soul is also inclined towards evil, except when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mercy on you. So our soul is inclined towards, and I talked about, my previous lectures, I talked about, anger, for example, desire, doubt, ego. Those are the things that are inherent in our nafs. And we have to continuously work towards overcoming those. So those are the two ways you can actually get trapped in it. Imam Khomeini gives like a roadmap on how to actually work towards, winning this battle, right? The first thing he says is actually try to guard against major sins. That's the first step. How do you win the battle? Guard against major sins. Now, it's interesting, right? You always ask somebody, right? Do you do a self-evaluation as far as what are you doing? A lot of times we think, that the minor sin I'm doing is just minor and just keep repeating it over and over again. Imam Ali says that actually is a major sin. So being very careful with even doing something that we think might be small and repeating it over and over again actually becomes a major sin. So first is actually getting rid of any negative traits from yourself. The second is replacing those negative traits with positive and good traits. So you get rid of the bad stuff and you bring in good stuff inside it. And then the third step, which is really the one that gets you going in the right direction, is actually submitting your will to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning when you do your actions, you bring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala into the picture and you take into consideration all your actions that you're doing based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I talked about where you replace, get rid of your bad, negative parts, bring in good deeds, and then keep Allah front and center. But what is a simple method? Like how do you actually do it? The first and foremost is called self-reflection and having accountability. And self-reflection means doing self-reflection daily. If you are doing your actions and you find out that your motivations are not perfectly clear and you're doing it for other reasons than for the sake of pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you have to go back and figure out why are your actions not in alignment with the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So your motivations is very important. So that comes with constant self-reflection. And not only self-reflection, but you have to hold yourself accountable. The second is actually doing deeds and actions that are dear to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which means whenever you do something, like for example, prayer, giving zakat, fasting, helping your neighbor, doing charity, right? All of those actions, you have to keep Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inside your view, and you do acts of worship. So when you're doing actions, right, don't just do actions, but do acts that actually constitute as acts of worship. The third is actually doing dua with it. There's a very simple dua. For example, "Oh Allah, make my heart sincere and purify my intentions for me." Doing dua, not only just doing acts of worship, but constantly doing dua, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then last but not least is avoiding the traps of your soul. For example, ego, anger, desire, and I'm not giving examples here anymore, right, because we're trapped for time, right? But desire, anger, ego, pride, doubt, all those things are ones that lead you towards the wrong path. So you have to figure out ways where you come into the middle for each one of those things. Our Holy Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, he says, the strong one is not the one who can overpower others, but the strong one is the one who controls himself when he's angry. Ultimately at the end of the day, right, this is a personal journey. So, when you start doing this, it's a personal transformation. So if you go through this personal transformation, it's a good reflection of you in the society. So you become a role model for other people when you go through this transformation. Not only that, you provide what is called as ethical leadership to the community, because if you are, working with, when you have humility inside of you, you're working with justice and fairness inside the community. And not only that, Rania, you are, promoting trust, compassion, and support